Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
Don't stop. He's what you get with his honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, welcome everybody. Another edition right here of Mode Push, an American view of F1. It's our F1 podcast that we love. Alex, Kirry, Dan, Jimenez joining you on the program as usual. Dan, how's it going, man? Everything good?
Yeah, everything's great. It's a race weekend. I'm stoked.
It's a good race weekend, too, where you feel like there's some extras with the sprint format. Going into Austria, the Orange Army is going to be super annoying this weekend as the Red Bull fans will be there at their quote-unquote home race. At some point in Europe, I feel like every race is a home race for Red Bull because the Orange gets obnoxious at this point.
Yeah, I remember when we even were buying tickets for the Singapore race, you could buy a ticket to specifically sit in the orange something section. And I was like, what's that about? And then I realized, it's the Max section. They have a ticket specifically to sit there if you want to be doused in orange smoke.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're going into, what round is this, Dan? How many races are we into the season? 7, 8? I always get thrown off. But the reality is it doesn't really matter because Red Bull and mostly Max Verstappen have won every race so far this season. So going into Austria, sprint format, after a week off, right off the bat on the racing stuff, because there's the actual news that we want to get into. Actually, let's get into the news first before we get into the races and the X's and O's of how things could shake out this weekend. AlphaTauri this week was announced that it is going to get another name change. And Helmut Marko just sounds like a grumpy dad at this point who's like, I don't care what you call it. Just make money. You're not us, okay? We're allowing you to be sort of adjacent to us, but you're going to make your own money. And, yes, you can get some of the help from, the father team here, but AlphaTauri will no longer be a team. It will be a different name. They'll have to get their own sponsorships. How on earth is this working, and what does the future of AlphaTauri look like?
Yeah, I mean, they just changed it to AlphaTauri, I think, in the 2020 season. So AlphaTauri's only been AlphaTauri by name for 3 seasons.
I just bought some AlphaTauri skinny jeans for like $1,000.
Just when you filled your whole closet full of European wear. It's never really made sense to me that they would try to be independent when they could have a much closer technical relationship with Red Bull. And, Helmut Marko said, you just mimic Red Bull as much as the regulations will allow, which is what Aston Martin's doing. It's not like everyone else is trying to mimic them. And so there's a part of it, too, is that they're going to relocate from Italy to the UK so that they can share resources with Red Bull and just be closer to that team. And so strategically, that makes sense. If Red Bull Corporation is going to own both teams, you might as well get the efficiencies of having the two close by and all the knowledge sharing. So it's really going to be a junior team with a similar spec car as possible to the senior team, and they're just going to be developing the talent. And hopefully that pulls them up from bottom of the grid to somewhere middle of the grid.
So there could be some immediate payoff, they will be a little bit more competitive right off the bat, just to being geographically closer to the big team, and so. But what are they talking about? Is this going to have, what kind of a name will this bear? Is it just going to be some other weird version of Red Bull? They already had Toro Rosso out in there. Then they go to AlphaTauri. That was there for 5 seconds. But they said, you need to go out and find your own sponsor. Are they talking about just having the name be nothing really related to Red Bull except for that they're in the same factory using a lot of the same equipment?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. I was thinking just call it Red Bull sugar-free.
Zero sugar Red Bull. No guts.
Make it the silver can.
No, you know what? If you're going to do it, go for the whole money grab, and it should be the Walmart F1 team. Just go for the Microsoft F1 team. I don't know. I mean, if someone is willing to just go, look, we're looking for a name, and we don't care what we're getting. if Red Bull's going, we will sell you our junior team's full sponsorship, and we will put you all over this thing. Watch Marlboro get right back into it, try to figure out a way to get back the cigarette game, trying to get going again. I don't know. I just don't know what that's going to look like, and if it's going to totally be a team that bears some totally strange name, some billionaire that just calls it, his own thing. That could also be – this could be a new – oh, you know what? Sorry, I already have what it is. If Ryan Reynolds doesn't buy into this one also, maybe the Saudi PIF fund could just rename.
There we go.
Sponsor it.
Live Golf Racing.
Live Golf Racing. I don't know. I'm not sure what the future of that looks like, but everybody's got to earn an extra dollar. If you're going to be worth something, then you might as well totally sell out.
Yeah. I also wonder what Ford is thinking right now with the fact that they're going to be coming in with the power plant sponsorship in 2026, and do they try to have more of a presence on the AlphaTauri or the junior team car? It'll already be called Red Bull Ford Racing in 2026. So I don't know, maybe there's an opportunity there to elevate the Lincoln brand, or who knows, use the Lincoln Town Car racing.
What about Mercury? Can we bring Mercury back?
Bring it back. Yeah. Oh boy.
I just don't know what I mean, the money is insane right now. So if you're going to rebrand and rename, and you don't have to just make up some dumb name, you could actually sell it and have it be a moneymaker. That's exactly. I mean, that's what Helmut Marko's been saying from the beginning with this AlphaTauri team. He's just like, look, I don't care, just make money. Like, you have to survive on your own. We're not going to hold your hand through this thing. We can allow you to use our resources and things like that. I mean, that makes sense to totally move them from Italy up to the UK. So you might as well do it. And if you can, then that does help in the development of drivers, because you are using the same stuff, getting in the same simulators, doing the same type of work. And so that could be a payoff. That's all we want to hear, right? Is another team that would be just as competitive as the big Red Bull team, or at least close to
That's
it.
Right.
So
they could take the fight to Red Bull. Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be nice.
One more thought here is, like, AlphaTauri, there had been rumors recently that they were going to sell the team, and it would have been dumb to sell the team, to sell that asset when they're the worst team on the grid. You're going to get bottom dollar for it. When you know that with a few changes like this, of just like copy paste from your big brother Red Bull, if you can get middle of the pack, like, that'll drive the valuation of that team up and sell it in a few years. Like, right now is not the time to sell AlphaTauri. You're going to get bottom dollar for it. And I think what we're seeing with the whole Ryan Reynolds Alpine thing, which we could talk about next, is the valuations of these F1 teams are in flux and really high.
Yeah, right now is a good time to get in. Values are going up, so you might as well throw some money at it, which is what Ryan Reynolds, and I think that what's his name, Rob McElhaney, right, from the same dude who owns Wrexham with. They're getting together, and they threw in a combined, is it 22% or something like that, almost a quarter of Alpine, which I've actually heard a couple of different people say this week that they were worth between $700 and $900 million. Not them, but I mean Alpine, the team could be worth that much.
Alpine.
And so you're talking about throwing in the $150 to $200 million range to buy into this thing, and that's what they did. But what I know about sports valuations is when you give a valuation to a team, the reality is it's usually a very, very lowball offer. It would be shocking to me that the Alpine team would be worth less than $1 billion. So this is a smart move, and it's another mainstream kind of buy-in. I think Michael B. Jordan is also part of the investment group as well. So you have all sorts of although Ryan Reynolds is Canadian, they do have, there's this, everything seems like it's kind of coming back to some sort of a U.S. influx of this being a popular thing here. It's getting more and more so. And these are two guys who obviously are trying to figure out with Wrexham how to get them into the Premier League over the next decade or plus, or whatever they're trying to do to get them as far up that English soccer league tier as they can. But with Alpine, can you make as big of an impact that quickly if you're a quarter of an owner? I don't think so, right? I mean, normally any move in F1 seems to be, turning a massive aircraft carrier in the water. It doesn't happen on a dime. It takes a little bit of time, but I don't know. I think this is a good thing for racing, though, once you get big names, mainstream names into ownership.
Yeah, I think that the real value will come from just the media benefits that Ryan Reynolds will bring. The money that comes in, this to purchase a quarter of Alpine, that doesn't really add dollars to the balance sheet. And in the end, you got to spend to the cost cap anyways. So I think the value will come from increased marketing and exposure, especially here in the U.S. Alpine as a brand, a car brand, is looking to launch their first sports car here in a few years in the U.S. So it seems like there's a concentrated effort here to get more of an American presence through, a high kind of Class A celebrity name. So I find this really interesting because we don't get very often like a solid data point on what these teams are worth. They're not publicly traded. So anytime the terms of a deal come out like this, I find it really interesting. So 900 million valuation for Alpine, whether that's higher or lower than we would have expected, I think what that says is that the $200 million buy-in for expanding the teams on the grid that was agreed upon in 2020 is way too low. You got to pay the 200 million to get in, and then you obviously got to put all the investment into the team and all that. But if you're getting 900 million for Alpine, the 500 million that was then suggested for Andretti Cadillac, that they let's increase the fee from 200 to 500, probably doesn't sound crazy. So I think that this probably makes it even harder for Andretti Cadillac to get into the sport at only a $200 million price point.
So you said you had something else for me, and I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's a birthday surprise. It's not my birthday, but tell me what you got. And let's keep rolling on some more of these outside of the racetrack type news stuff.
Oh man! So this was sent over to me from a close friend and listener of the pod, Morgan Davis. So shout out to Morgan who's listening from home. So we all know these sim rigs, right? That everybody loves to get to race the F1 sims. They're getting really popular, and they're kind of getting crazy in terms of how much money you could put down as little as $500 or as much as 10 or 20 grand on these sim rigs to race F1 at home. And so there's a brand, and this is going around Reddit too today. So this is Reddit's catching on to this. There's a brand of these sim rigs called DOF Reality. I guess DOF stands for degree of freedom. Is it dorky engineering term?
Sure. So
they send an email. The subject line of this email is wife approved rigs, which I think might be the most intriguing email subject line I've ever read. So I'm just going to read to you, Alex, the content of this marketing email from DOF Rigs. So this is to sell a motion-based F1 simulator rig. It says, our motion simulators are increasingly popular among individuals, including those with wives, who play a significant role in the decision-making process. Wives discover the captivating world of our degree of freedom reality motion simulators and are drawn to their immersive experiences they offer. They enjoy the thrilling racing adventures, exciting flights, and engaging arcade games that provide new exhilarating sensations. If you're wondering how to approach the topic of purchasing our DOF reality motion simulator with your wife, we have a few recommendations.
Yes. Hold on, let me write these down.
Number one, consider inviting her to a romantic dinner at her favorite restaurant, creating the perfect setting for an open and honest conversation about your shared interests.
Okay. All right.
Surprising her with a thoughtful gift can demonstrate your appreciation for her support. Avoid discussing the purchase during bedtime, as it may not be the ideal time for a productive discussion.
Of course not.
By following these steps, you can engage in a meaningful dialogue, emphasizing the excitement and joy that a motion simulator can bring to both of your lives. And then the email ends with a call to action, big red button. What you're supposed to click at the bottom says, surprise your wife with motion, which
that sounds totally
I'm not going to
weird.
get into the double entendre there. But this just brought so much joy to me that
my gosh,
these folks, bless their hearts, selling these rigs, they're you know what we should do for this campaign, what will really get sales going is convince them that their wives should like this.
We've got to tell them that, well, it's not even that the wives are going to like it. It's more you have to start there, because this is a tough sell anyway. So maybe hit up the person in the house who, if you can get them to almost not hate it, which I'm on their website right now, by the way. And if you want to get their higher end rig, we're talking, $2,500 after you buy a TV to put it to attach to it. So I But at the same time, I'm also formulating in my head, honey, the kids and I can absolutely jam on stuff like this. And we told ourselves we wanted to spend more time with the kids. I mean, obviously, there's part of that they would love. And on top of it, it's a real simulator version of driving. We don't want our kids driving a real car right off the bat. Let's get them in the simulator. Boom. That is it right there. That's all I have to do.
Sold.
Yes, these are pretty cool looking. So I'm confused here because all the pieces that you buy. So if you buy everything together, yeah, so you can get the whole thing. I mean, it's like a video game console, like the full immersive driving experience. It's like being at Disney World, right? And at the Avatar ride at Disney World. It kind of moves you around with everything. But a 5-point harness on a real gaming chair with a seat in front of you. I'm assuming this is what Max uses when he's beating everybody in the esports world.
Right. Yeah. I've seen Lando's setup. Lando's setup is like a $400 setup, and then like Max's is, tens of thousands of dollars. And Lando like sucks at sim racing. It's pretty funny. He'll stream it too, and he just gets like beat by so many people, which I just love seeing that.
I know. That's part of that is so you can go, you know what? It's fine because in real life racing, I'm an actual race car driver. And then you have Max who can't turn it off ever, even in the E-world, like where he is legitimately like a top 5 racer, E-racer across the entire freaking world. It's super weird.
Yeah, I just love the logic here. Like, it's a big purchase, and yeah, you got to get the big purchase passed by the boss. But at the same time, it's like it's a time suck. Like, I did sim racing for about 1 week. I signed up, got an iRacing subscription, got a little steering wheel, and I like didn't go to sleep that week. I just played it throughout the night, and I was like, this is going to be terrible for my family life, for my marriage. I can't, like, this is an addiction. I can't even, like, it's like, just something pre-wired in my brain that I would have an unhealthy addiction to sim racing. And so I've just like kept it at arm's length and I was going to say, I don't think that I could ever really get into that.
I love how you're like, yeah. So I found out heroin was a problem. So I put it in my drawer. All right. I'm never going to use it again. Like you're like, it was totally terrible. Anyway, but I only get on it. I don't know, throughout the middle of the night, a couple of times a month. It's fine. That's where we are with all this. And I'm telling you, these setups look crazy, by the way. Like, full on, the amount of movement you can do with these are crazy. So if you're into that. All right, speaking of, let's go from fake racing to real racing. What on earth has happened this week running up to the Austrian Grand Prix? I always like this race because it's in a beautiful setting. It's also jammed kind of in the mountains, and it also has given us some rain in the past, which is, I think, kind of the only way we're going to get an exciting race in 2023 again. It's like any race with rain, we're okay with because it feels like it messes things up just a little bit, just enough to where every point isn't going to be stolen by Red Bull.
Yeah, and even in the dry, it has it ranks pretty high on the list of number of overtakes per race compared to the other tracks. It's a very fast track. It's short. It's not the shorter than Monaco by mileage is shorter. But by time, I think it's the shortest racetrack. It's like a minute.
Minute 5, something like that, right?
Track record. Yeah, the track record's like a minute 5. So race pace is probably like a minute 10. So it's a very short lap. It's the fewest number of turns, and it's got some pretty long DRS sections. And so there's lots of chances to overtake. And what will be interesting is I think one of the trends we're seeing lately is traffic during qualifying. Like the drivers back up in that third sector to be able to give themselves, enough space to be able to run. And when everybody backs up like that, then if you got out of the garage too late, you might not get across the line in time to make that lap. And so there's a kind of discussion coming out of, it's not going to happen this week because it's too late, but in future sprint races at short tracks, could we try a totally different approach to qualifying, like maybe single run, which would be my vote is we should just do one timed lap per driver. Everyone goes out one by one. And then you don't run into traffic issues, but it's a great track. One other thing too, being a sprint weekend, is we'll only have one practice session and then we go straight into qualifying for the race. So there's not a lot of time to test new upgrades. And, there's just been a lot of talk of bringing upgrades into the next few races, probably more coming to Silverstone than here at the Red Bull Ring. But Ferrari bringing a new wing is one that has been published that they tested recently at like a kind of a media event that they did with their Le Mans car. So we'll see some updates, but not a ton because there just won't be a lot of time to correlate them and vet them out before qualifying.
So a couple of things that happened today, I was noticing that one, Sergio Perez apparently wasn't feeling well. And so he didn't get into a car at all today, and they're trying to get him ready, like in some rest ahead of race weekend, which of course is all accelerated on a with the format being what it is this weekend. So Sergio Perez is a guy who we went from being like, this guy could win, this guy could steal the championship from Max, to being a guy who everyone's going, so who's going to take Checo's seat after this year? So who needs this race more than anybody? Who needs to have a good race this weekend more than anybody across the entire grid? Because there's some rookies who really need a burst of energy, but they're also rookies, and so you kind of give them a little bit of a length of rope there. But who really needs the biggest weekend here in Austria to be able to kind of turn their season around, or to kind of keep the momentum up that they may have built up?
Several names come to mind. First one is Charles. He won this race last year.
That's right.
And he has one podium so far this year. So I think that there's pressure on him.
Well, Carlos would have gotten second too if his engine wouldn't have blown up, right?
Oh yeah, good memory. Yeah, it's Ferrari should be great here, but like a lot changes in a year. There's talks about his contract. Contract talks have begun with Ferrari about a contract extension for Charles, but they're going slow, apparently, is what Charles had said. So I think that there's still, like, Ferrari and Charles are still feeling each other out long term. And so if Charles wants to get a re-sign, then, I think he really needs to turn his season around. The other name that comes to mind is Lance Stroll. Like, with just the discrepancy between him and Fernando's performance, the dude's got to pick it up, because I think that there's real value being lost at Aston Martin from the fact that he's 70 some odd points behind Fernando Alonso. When, pick another driver who could fill that spot, and, you're guaranteeing a second place finish in the Constructors' Championship versus a third or a fourth if, Lance can't.
But how do you have that? How does Papa Stroll have that conversation? And I know that people kind of go, yeah, but if he doesn't perform, then he'll have to fire him. It's like, yeah, but this is also a guy who could have been fired other times in his career by his dad, and he hasn't been.
Yeah, I think this is the first time that they legitimately could be a championship competing team through all the eras of Force India and Racing Point. Mm-hmm. It's finally. I mean, when it was Sebastian Vettel and him racing for maybe trying to crack into the points, it was never a question. But now there's real dollars being lost from the fact that he's putting them at risk from not finishing higher up in the constructor standings. So I don't know how that conversation goes, if it goes, but Lance or Lawrence being the capitalist that he is, you have to think that the question is definitely on the table.
He doesn't have that conversation with him. He just he sends him in the mail. He just sends something to him in the mail. That's it. And it's just like, boom, you've been terminated. Like, make him the PR guy or something, right? Just like give him like a super low level instead of racing, because the last thing you're going to do is like make him the reserve driver and have him hang around in the garage, drinking from those weird water bottles and being like, I can race better than that. Like that's there's no way that this guy. And you know what stinks is that he's a pretty talented driver for the most part. He does do some weird boneheaded stuff, but like he could drive. He could have a seat in F1 on another team, but I just don't see it happening after, going to another team that his dad's not the boss of. It doesn't seem like it makes any sense. So if he
doesn't seem like that happens.
Yeah, if he gets dismissed, then it's probably from the sport altogether.
Yeah, I could see too that like he just transitions into management and he becomes racing sporting director or something at Aston Martin and just starts learning the business side of it, to someday inherit the family business and run the team when he's older. It feels like that's what he ends up doing long term.
So one thing that came out of today's press conferences as well was Lewis Hamilton saying that he was in favor of – Lewis Hamilton has suggested that teams should not be able to shift focus to next year's car until August 1, citing Red Bull's stranglehold on everybody else in terms of development. Max Verstappen's comments to that were, I didn't hear him say this when he won all those titles for all these years, did I? This is how Formula One works. Life isn't fair. I love the idea of telling a 7-time world champion, hey, life isn't fair, dude. So the back and forth, but at the same time, all of us who love watching something that's a little bit more competitive than what it's been, and sports do this, they'll shift focus on things, and they'll make it to where some developmental things will happen to try to kind of even the playing field. But the whole thing about this sport is if you're good at developing stuff, you get rewarded by beating everybody else, even if it is by a lot. Yeah.
The advantage is compound, because if you're 100 some odd points ahead come August, then just like fully start working on next year. Like, you're not going to lose that lead. And so I guess that creates a bit of a disadvantage. But these teams could also, if you're like, you could scrap this year and just go ahead and start on next year. Just like, hey, we're not going to, this isn't our year. So Mercedes could start on their 2024 car development right now if they wanted to. So in the end, you got to spend to the cost cap every year. And I also wonder how you police that. How do you know that, like, hey, right now we're spending cost cap development time on our 2023 car that isn't going to help us for 2024? Of course it is. Like, I think that's just probably a bit of a pie in the sky concept from Lewis that I think would be hard to enforce.
Dan, before we get into your dream scenarios of how this weekend could go with the sprint races and with the full-on GP in Austria, Lando Norris was apparently robbed while on vacation down in Spain this past week. He said he went to dinner and their villa was robbed. Some things were quite expensive, some things were not. And he said he'd leave it at that, and because the conversation's still ongoing, so he doesn't want to reveal too much about it. I've been to that place before, and tell you what they don't do is they don't rob my room, because I'm not an F1 driver. They don't see that guy and go, ooh, I bet he's got some nice stuff in there. So best wishes to Lando, who just had some stuff ripped off from him in Spain. Even just like a Richard Mille watch. I mean, come on, those are like $500,000. That's enough for the ugliest watch on the planet. Okay, so
seriously,
I mean, we just fell out of talks with them. They were going to be a major sponsor of the show, and then they ghosted us, and so that's why I'm talking trash. But this weekend in Austria, you've got the sprint races. You've got which is exciting. Remind everybody about the format of how sprint races go, because Friday sort of turns into what Saturdays normally are, and then Saturdays is a mini race, and then Sunday the full GP. How does it work?
Yeah, for here in America time, early Friday morning will be the one practice session, and then about midday our time will be qualifying for the race, not for the sprint. And then Saturday we do qualifying for the sprint, and then go straight into the sprint race. And the sprint race outcome no longer impacts the starting grid for Sunday.
That's right. That's
from Friday qualifying. So Saturday is all self-contained just to get some points. And then one thing about the sprint qualifying is that that they have rules around what tires can be used. So in the first two qualifying sessions, which I believe are shorter, you got to use mediums. And then in the last qualifying session, you have to use softs. And that's I think that they're trying to experiment with a little bit more control there to try and make it maybe a bit more competitive or interesting. So we'll see how that impacts things. Baku is going to be was the first sprint weekend of the year, but qualifying got rained out. I think there's rain during qualifying. And there was, I think, a bunch of red flags. And so it was a little weird. We didn't quite get to see how that all that played out. So if you're watching sprint qualifying, that's one thing to be aware of, that they kind of are forced to use a particular tire depending on the session.
So with the setup as it is, and with the racetrack kind of being a little bit more open to passing, does that also mean it's a little bit more open to Max really extending himself into a far, far, far lead? Is there a possibility that the whispers of upgrades across the board have been effective enough and keep stepping up? Because I think the intrigue might be if Aston Martin is close or a little bit closer to what Red Bull has been delivering, and Mercedes as well, who said that they have some upgrades that may be a little bit more effective.
Yeah. I think that we will see the gap close between Red Bull and those other two teams you mentioned. I guess my bold prediction this weekend would be that Red Bull, if they win, they don't win with more than a 10-second lead on the rest of the field. and that these performance upgrades are going to tighten up the competition this weekend, which I think we're all looking forward to.
Imagine saying that. I think that it's going to be so close they're going to win by less than 10 seconds this weekend, or by just under 10 seconds.
A long ways.
I don't. What podium do you want to see? What's the one where you go, man, I wish that this one kind of worked out? I know that Ferrari feels like it. The thing about Ferrari is that it feels like to me they haven't earned anything this year. There hasn't been one thing that they deserve. Like, oh man, we've been close. It hasn't really felt like that.
Yeah, it's they've never really felt like they've been in the hunt the same way that Aston has, and really only Aston's the one that feels like they've been in the hunt. So what I'd like to see Fernando win. The 33rd win. I think that would be great. I think that would give them momentum to continue to build towards a title fight maybe next year. Ferrari, like they're just kind of they're part of like just my heart wants them to win, but then the other part of me is just realistic that I just don't think that they're even in contention. So I think that the most likely scenario, Red Bull wins with another Aston and a Mercedes on the pole. But I think that there's real chance, especially if rain comes into it, that we get an Aston Martin at the top of the podium. One thing is if Sergio doesn't get feeling better, they might just pull Daniel Ricciardo up and say, dude, you're driving this weekend, which would be really interesting to see how Danny Rick does in that car. When, the last few years we've seen him on the grid, he hasn't been in super competitive equipment.
All right. So for this weekend, does Red Bull win both the sprint and the big GP?
I mean, that's how it's been. I don't think we've had a discrepancy like a winner of a sprint not win the main race. So I got to think whoever wins the sprint wins the main, even though it doesn't impact qualifying. I think that's where the money's at.
What's crazy is that, we're talking about this and we're talking about what this weekend could look like. And it's really crazy to think that these teams have done all this work and they've gotten to the point now where, I mean, it just seems like there's no shot for anybody else who's in the midfield is always just the midfield. But like these teams, is the disparity between the bottom three teams and the top three teams, has it gotten even worse?
It feels like that. I would say yes. I would say that the middle five, if you want to call it, the middle four, whatever the math works out to be, are really competitive.
Sure.
They're super close. You kind of put them under a blanket. And then there's like a big jump to the top two or three, and then a big jump to the bottom, 8 or bottom 2 or 3 in like 8th through 10th. And I with time, the rest of those will catch up. I guess the real question will be, is there a performance, an aspect to the performance and the design of the Red Bull car that no one's quite figured out yet? There's a lot of theories around, hey, we saw their floor. There's, unique anti-dive suspension. There's downwash side pods. You can copy all the stuff you can see, but is there something that we're not seeing that Red Bull still is going to keep a lasting performance advantage? Because if not, then I think it will all converge to a much more competitive field by the end of the year.
If you had downwash side pods on your bingo card for the podcast, then you're the big winner, Dan. You worked it in again. I don't know how you always do it, but you did it. It's crazy to think all the development things that are happening with this. I know that everybody's giving Lewis a bunch of crap for daring to suggest that development shouldn't be able to happen for the next year's car until August to make things a little bit more evenly spaced, because they just came off of so many years of dominance. But I think we would all love, like this weekend, what we talk about is can some other teams get close this weekend? It seems like we're doing that every week now. And so the suggestion might sound crazy. It might sound a little bit hypocritical, but it's also kind of what we want a little bit in this sport, is some more parity when it comes down to it. All right. Big weekend, of course, in racing, and we're really excited about how this thing may or may not shake out. I'm hoping there's some rain just for some drama, but we are going to have a good one there in Austria, and then we're going to break it down again next week for you as well. Dan, anything in closing here?
Fingers crossed that Danny Rick, not wishing anything ill on Sergio Perez, but fingers crossed that Danny Rick can get some track time this weekend. I think it'd be pretty cool.
Not wishing any ill will on Checo, but I hope the poison that Danny Rick put in his food worked. No problem. All right. For Dan Jimenez, I'm Alex Kirry. We'll be back to break down the Austria GP after this weekend. Have a fun race weekend, everybody.